During World War II, the Grand Mufti of Palestine collaborated with Adolf Hitler and had plans to build a concentration camp in Nazis. That is the reality. The reality is that in 1967, the Israelis lost the war, would have resulted in the loss of thousands of lives. That's the reality. The reality is that if the Israelis do not protect some of the Jews living in the West Bank, there will continue to be attacks. And that is the underlying problem here. The underlying problem is the inability to reach cohesion, to live with a neighbor that you disagree with, that you have a sort of history with, and not be able to see past the history and move forward. Israel pulled out of Gaza in 2005, and when it did so, it witnessed the election of Hamas, a group that I think could be reasonably categorized as a terrorist group, but is, at minimal, a radical Islamist group. Their charter advocates the death and destruction of not just the Israeli Jewish population, but Jews all over the world. It's difficult to expect an Israeli to sit down with a political entity that talks like this, that has a charter like this. It's not acceptable or expected, but at the end of the day, Israel should negotiate with Hamas or any group that it disagrees with in the name of peace and prosperity. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is aware of the reality of the settlement situation and has not been opposed to the idea of a Palestinian state, and would have to be aware of what would be accepted for a peace to be realistic and feasible. I do believe there is a solution to the situation, and a more detailed explanation of what peace between Israel and a Palestinian state would require could be read in Anatole Lieven and John Bozeman's book, Ethical Realism, which has a chapter going into greater detail about how peace would work. But at the end of the day, and this is something that I do believe both sides are guilty of, but more so one side than the other, and that's almost irrelevant, that cohesion and acceptance need to go hand in hand in order for anything else to work. That cannot happen with groups like Hamas in power, or Fatah, or any group that constantly charges accusations of genocide that don't occur. And it's not a realistic expectation while this mentality is still in place. That has to go before we can be realistic about any prospects for long-term peace. Are there radical Jews and Israelis that advocate essentially the same thing, only by opposite standards? Of course there are. But they're also not given a loud enough voice, or are not maximally accepted by the Israelis for the problem. And I'd also like to mention that I have been in Israel. I've met Israelis. One of my best friends is a Israeli by way of Yemen, and he's never expressed any kind of lamentation about being an Israeli, and seems to believe that his life is infinitely much better in Israel than it could have been in Yemen. Partly because he is a Jew, and partly because he believes it's a better life overall. It's not enough simply to say that other races that are not white are worse off.
My opponent claimed that Jews aren't welcome in the West Bank and never have been. And to back that up, he cited Mufti Hajmi al-Husseini. First of all, let me say that the Mufti was not elected by the Palestinians. He was a Palestinian, but he was appointed by the British during the British Mandate period. So, trying to blame the Palestinians for something that a British appointee did or didn't do is ridiculous. But the idea that Jews aren't welcome and never have been, I don't know where my opponent got this, because there was such a thing as a Palestinian Jew. There was such a thing as a Palestinian if security is a big issue for Israel, why are the settlements there in the first place? I mean, it makes no sense to move people into a territory and then say, you know, you need soldiers there to protect them. To move into an occupied territory, which, by the way, under the Fourth Geneva Convention, it's illegal to colonize land with your people. But to move people in there and then say you need soldiers to protect them, it seems, I mean, I have a theory on why they do it. They do that is because they want more land, not because, you know, I don't know what my prompt explanation would be. But that Netanyahu is aware of the settlement situation and what it would take to make a state. I mean, you know, if he is, then he's not showing it because he's continually allowing settlements to be built in Israel. I mean, in the West Bank, rather. He's allowing, you know, the seizure of property of Palestinians in East Jerusalem, as I mentioned before. So, I mean, if he's aware of the settlement situation, that's a problem, then he should also be aware that he's one of the main people in perpetuating that problem. The Gaza disengagement and the Hamas elections, Hamas charter. Well, the Gaza disengagement was basically what happened was there were settlements in Gaza. In 2005, Ariel Sharon decided to pull them out, but this wasn't for, you know, humanitarian reasons because he loved the Palestinians or he wanted to show faith. It was because the military management of those settlements was way not cost efficient. So what they did was they took them and they moved them to the West Bank settlements. So it was, yes, and then after that, that's true. Hamas did get elected, and the reason they got elected was because Fatah was corrupt and because the Palestinians have recognized exactly what Israel was doing, not just pulling people out of Gaza because they felt they were feeling nice. The Hamas charter, I mean, I could tell you things about how Hamas politicians today say that the charter is a historical document and has no bearing on anything, but ultimately the fact that Hamas has a charter has no bearing on whether or not Israel is an apartheid state. What Hamas does or doesn't do doesn't change the fact that Israel is maintaining an institutionalized system of oppression, domination, and separation for the sake of one ethnic group, the Jewish national group, over another, the Palestinian national group. That is the bottom line here. That's the issue we're debating. We're not debating Hamas. We're not debating Hashemi, not Hussein. We're not debating any of these guys. As far as the Yemeni Jew friend being happy in Israel, I imagine he is. While there's definitely discrimination by the Ashkenazis against Mizrahim and Sephardim, that's kind of a little too complex to go into here. But he's happy I imagine he is happy in Israel because he's not a member of the Palestinian national group. He's been identified by the state as being a member of the Jewish national group. So while he may face discrimination from the Ashkenazis,